So we have to just realize at this point that the Washington Post does not like Bernie Sanders from an editorial perspective. And they're clearly involved in a Bernie smear operation, even if not completely deliberate. By sort of default, this is what they are doing. So I want to look at the Washington Post coverage of Bernie, but I also want to look back at the back and forth about the Washington Post's coverage of Bernie, which actually maybe tells us even more. So the first thing is, does the Washington Post do a bunch of anti-Bernie coverage? The answer is yes. That's okay. They're allowed to. Let's look at some of the stories. This is just a list of stories from back in March of 2016 during a 2-day period. 16 negative stories about Bernie, including some stories implying Bernie is some kind of misogynist to Hillary Clinton, racializing some headlines about Bernie focusing on white states, calling Bernie partisan. So this is undeniably a very anti-Bernie set of stories at a very key moment in the 2016 primary. And it has continued. If we look at the recent couple of months, the Washington Post ran a story about Iowa doesn't like Bernie anymore. Bernie looking to Canada for affordable drugs like insulin doesn't really make sense. The NRA helped elect Bernie and Bernie won't admit it. Bernie is running into a, quote, socialist reality that is interfering with his ideas. I mean, just persistently hammering away at Bernie. So Bernie did the right thing. He spoke up and he said something, and the Washington Post has responded in a really silly way, completely strawmanning Bernie's complaint. Bernie said, the Post writes negative things about me a lot. This is demonstrably true. I mean, it's just a fact. And the Washington Post's executive editor, Martin Barron, came back and said, oh, Bernie's claiming with no evidence that Jeff Bezos is telling us to write bad things about Bernie. Jeff Bezos has nothing to do with the day-to-day decisions editorially of the Washington Post. Wait a sec. What? Jeff Bezos, what are you talking about? Okay, the Washington Post is owned by Amazon. Jeff Bezos runs Amazon. But Bernie wasn't saying that Jeff Bezos is calling the Washington Post and saying write bad things about Bernie Sanders. So the Washington Post is arguing against something Bernie never claimed, but there is still something really important to understand here. In a lot of news outlets that have bias, you will often hear this argument. No one's telling me what to write. Therefore, there is no institutional bias here. You hear this all the time on Fox News. Fox News reporters, no one tells me, no one upstairs tells me exactly what to say. Me and my producers figure out what to say. I and my producers. When you hear from current or former RT people, RT being Russian state television, RT anchors will say, I have total freedom here. No one comes to me and says, you've got to do this or you've got to say that or defend Putin or whatever. That's not how it works. That's an extremely childish understanding of how it works. People are hired because they are being selected for what it is they are going to do. RT anchors are hired not so that they can be told what to do, but because they wouldn't need to be told. They are selected to fill a certain role. Same thing on Fox News. And the Washington Post, Bernie never claimed Bezos is telling people what to write. But the way it works is that the newsroom is assembled to get people writing what it is that the Washington Post wants written. It could be Bezos or someone else who is making the general call about what the attitude is going to be or not. But this is the way it works. The reporters writing this stuff at the Washington Post most likely don't need to be told write negative stuff about Bernie. At the end of the day, none of this is surprising. The Washington Post has done really good investigative stuff in the Trump era, and that's good, and we can praise them for it. At the same time, when it comes to the Dem primary, the Washington Post is demonstrably and reliably anti-Bernie in their coverage of Democratic primaries. Okay, we know that. We should be scrutinizing everything that we take in terms of media, this show included, but we can't deny that without getting into Bezos's calling, the Washington Post editorially has been consistently anti-Bernie, period. And Bernie's right to call that out.